I never imagined retirement would feel like a second career, one that didn't include weekends, sick days, or vacations. The first hint came from my son Daniel's casual tone as he called me one Tuesday evening. "Mom, Jessica and I have a beach. House reserved in Myrtle Beach for 10 days next month. Could you stay at our place and watch the kids? Ethan has soccer practice Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Lily needs to be at dance by 4 on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He didn't even pause to let me answer. Their summer schedules are in the family calendar. Jessica will share it with you. Oh, and the neighbor's dog barks at night sometimes, so you might want to bring earplugs. No. How are you doing? No, I know this is a lot to ask. Not even a, would this work for you? Just a detailed list of responsibilities dropped in my lap, like I had nothing better to do with my time than to reorganize my life around their vacation plans. I heard Jessica's voice in the background. Ask her if she can come a day early to help us pack. My name is Margaret Wilson, Maggie to my friends. And at 67, I thought I'd finally have time to pursue the interests I'd set aside during my 35 years as an elementary school teacher. My small ranch house in Lakeside Heights had a spare bedroom I'd converted into an art studio, with a beautiful view of the old oak tree in my backyard. I'd dreamed of spending my retirement mornings with a cup of tea, watching the light change as I worked on my watercolors. But somehow, 3 years into retirement, my easel was gathering dust, my paints were drying up in their tubes, and my calendar was filled with one thing: grandma duty. Don't misunderstand. I adore my grandchildren. Ethan, with his curious mind and endless questions about how things work, reminds me so much of Daniel at that age. And little Lily, with her imagination and theatrical flair, brings a spark of joy into any room she enters. It's just that somewhere along the way, my role shifted from grandma who visits with cookies and special outings to unpaid, full-time childcare provider. That call about the Myrtle Beach vacation wasn't unusual. It was just the latest in a pattern that had been building since my retirement. At first, it was occasional afternoons when Jessica had a big showing. She sold luxury homes. Or when Daniel had to travel for his marketing firm. Then it became regular weekends, then school holidays. Eventually, it seemed that any time the children didn't have school, I was expected to rearrange my life to care for them. "You don't have to say yes," my neighbor Eleanor told me one afternoon, as we sat on my porch. The late spring air carried the scent of lilacs, and Eleanor's knowing eyes studied me over her reading glasses. "You're allowed to have your own life, Maggie." Eleanor was 70, a retired librarian with silver hair always pulled back in a neat bun. She'd been widowed for nearly a decade and had built a fulfilling life for herself, volunteering at the literacy center and traveling with her senior hiking club. She never had children, but she had firm opinions about family boundaries. "They're my grandchildren," I said reflexively. "Family helps family. There's helping, and then there's being." "Taken for granted," Eleanor replied, setting down her teacup with a definitive clink. "When was the last time you worked on a painting?" I couldn't remember. That night, I stood in the doorway of my neglected art studio. A half-finished landscape of the lake sat abandoned on the easel, the watercolors now flat and lifeless under a thin layer of dust. Beside it lay a brochure for a week-long watercolor workshop in Sedona, a dream trip I'd been putting off for 3 years. Each time I'd planned to go, something came up with the grandchildren. The next morning, I called Daniel back. "Of course I can watch the kids," I heard myself say. "Just email me their schedules." Daniel didn't even thank me. He just launched into more logistics: the neighbor's spare key location, Ethan's soccer, tournament that weekend, Lily's food preferences that had apparently changed since last month. After hanging up, I opened my calendar and wrote Myrtle Beach duty across 10 days in July. Then I picked up the Sedona workshop brochure and slipped it into a drawer. The day before their vacation, I arrived at Daniel and Jessica's sprawling two-story in Oakwood Estates, the upscale neighborhood across town from my modest ranch house. Jessica was rushing around in designer athleisure wear, barking instructions into her phone while simultaneously pointing out various notes stuck to the refrigerator. "The emergency contacts are here," she said, barely making eye contact. "Ethan needs his inhaler before soccer, even if he says he doesn't. Lily won't eat anything green right now, just work around it. Oh, and we had to let the housekeeping service go last month, so if you could keep things tidy." Daniel appeared with their matching luggage, barely acknowledging me before asking if I'd picked up his dry cleaning as he'd texted me to do yesterday. I had. "Great," he said, checking his watch. "We should get going to beat traffic. Kids, come say goodbye to Grandma. She's going to stay with you while we're gone." Ethan and Lily came thundering down the stairs, launching themselves at me with genuine excitement that momentarily melted my frustrations. As I hugged them, Jessica called out last-minute reminders while heading out the door. "We'll FaceTime tonight to say goodnight," Daniel called over his shoulder, already halfway to their SUV. And just like that, I was alone with the children in a house full of responsibilities that weren't mine. That evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me with her big blue eyes. "Mommy says you like watching us because otherwise you'd be lonely." Something inside me went very still. "Is that what Mommy says?" I asked carefully. Lily nodded. "She told Daddy that you don't have anything else to do anyway, and we're doing you a favor. Children have a way of repeating things with unvarnished clarity." I kissed Lily's forehead and turned out the light, then sat in the hallway for a long time, those words echoing in my head. You don't have anything else to do anyway. Was that how my son saw me? As a woman with an empty life, grateful for their demands because they gave me purpose? The painting studio flashed in my mind, the Sedona brochure, the book club I'd dropped, the senior yoga class I'd quit because it conflicted with Lily's preschool pickup. I picked up my phone and found a text from Jessica. "Can you wash Ethan's uniform tonight? He needs it for tomorrow's practice. Also, we forgot to order more coffee pods. Can you grab some? The card for household expenses is in my desk drawer. Thanks." No, how are things going? No, are the kids behaving? Not even a proper request, just more tasks assigned. That night, I slept poorly in their uncomfortable guest bed. In the morning as I made breakfast for the children, I found myself watching the clock, mentally calculating how many hours until their parents returned. 9 days, 17 hours to go. By the third day, I had settled into an exhausting routine. Up at 6 a.m. to prepare breakfast and lunch boxes, shuttling between soccer fields and dance studios, preparing meals the children only partially ate, keeping the house tidy, dealing with the endless laundry that 2 active children generate, and fielding texts from Jessica with additional requests. Could you take the comforter to the special cleaner across town? Only they know how to handle it properly. We forgot. Ethan has a science project due when he gets back. Materials are in a bag in the garage. Can you schedule the plumber? The upstairs shower is making that noise again. Each evening, Daniel and Jessica would FaceTime, showing off sunny beaches and fancy restaurants. They seemed relaxed and happy, cocktails in hand, while I sat exhausted on their sofa with 2 increasingly bored children who missed their parents. "How's everything going, Mom?" Daniel would ask, but continue before I could really answer. "Hey, did Ethan's new cleats arrive? Make sure he wears them to break them in before the tournament." On day 5, I managed to slip away during the children's afternoon screen time to call Eleanor. I sat in my car in the driveway, finally allowing myself to acknowledge how overwhelmed I felt. "They don't even see me as a person," I admitted, my voice catching. "I'm just available. A resource to be used." "Oh, Maggie," Eleanor sighed. "This isn't just about this vacation, is it?" "No," I whispered. It's been building for years. I don't know how to say no without seeming like a bad grandmother. Setting boundaries doesn't make you bad anything, Eleanor said firmly. It makes you human. After we hung up, I sat in the car staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed faded somehow, like a watercolor left too long in the sun. When had I stopped being Maggie Wilson, with hopes and dreams of my own, and become merely Daniel's mom, or the kid's grandma? The next day brought a new text from Jessica. We're thinking of extending our stay by 3 days since we're having such a wonderful time. That works for you, right? Not, would that be possible? Not, we know it's a lot to ask. Not even a proper question, just an assumption that my time was infinitely flexible, available whenever they wanted it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. 3 more days. 3 more days of soccer practice and dance lessons and meal prep and housekeeping, all while my own home sat empty, my art supplies gathered dust, and the registration deadline for the Sedona workshop, now only 2 months away, drew closer. Something inside me shifted, like a heavy stone finally dislodging after years of pressure. I began to type, then stopped. This wasn't a conversation to have over text. I deserved more than that. We all did. Instead, I wrote, "Let's discuss when. You call tonight." That evening, when the FaceTime call came through, I was ready. I waited until the children had chatted with their parents and gone upstairs to get ready for bed. Then I took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. "About extending your trip," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. I have other commitments beginning the day you're scheduled to return." Daniel's face registered surprise, quickly followed by confusion. "What commitments? You didn't mention anything before." "I shouldn't have to," I replied, surprising myself with my directness. "My time is my own, Daniel. I agreed to 10 days, and I'll honor that, but I can't stay longer." Jessica leaned into the frame, her expression a mixture of irritation and disbelief. "But what could be so important? It's just 3 more days, Maggie. Just 3 more days. Just a weekend. Just a few hours. Just. How many justs had accumulated over the years, stealing pieces of my life? "I have a registration deadline for a painting workshop in Sedona," I said, lifting my chin slightly. "It's something I've wanted to do for years, and I can't put it off any longer." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "A painting workshop? Since when do you paint?" The question struck me like a physical blow. I had been an artist long before I was his mother. I'd put my creative pursuits on hold while raising him, picked them up briefly after retirement, then set them aside again to care for his children. "Since always," I said quietly. "You used to sit beside me when I painted. You'd ask me to teach you how to mix colors." He looked uncomfortable, as if I'd reminded him of something he'd deliberately forgotten. Jessica looked impatient. "Well, can't you register online?" she asked. "You don't need to physically be at home for that." "That's not the point," I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "The point is that I made plans for 10 days of childcare, not 13. I have my own life, with my own priorities and commitments." Daniel's expression darkened. "Mom, we really need this time away. My job has been incredibly stressful, and Jessica has that big listing coming up." "And I understand that," I interrupted. Gently. "But my answer is still no. I'll be leaving as planned on Sunday." The call ended shortly after, with tension hanging in the air. I sat on the sofa for a long time afterward, my heart racing despite my outward calm. I had never spoken to Daniel that way as an adult. I had always been accommodating, always rearranged my life to fit his needs. Yet instead of guilt, I felt something unexpected. Relief, like I'd set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for too long. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was Daniel. "Mom," he began, his voice that particular tone of reasonable that he used when trying to persuade difficult clients. "I think you're overreacting a bit. We're not asking for much." "I'm not overreacting," I said calmly. "I'm setting a boundary." "A boundary?" He sounded genuinely confused. "With family? Mom, that's cold." "Is it cold when you set boundaries at work? When you tell a client you can't meet on a weekend because that's family time? When Jessica tells her clients she's unavailable on Sundays?" Silence on the other end. "I love Ethan and Lily," I continued. "I love being their grandmother, but that's not all I am, Daniel. I'm also a person with my own interests and needs. And it's time I remembered that." The conversation didn't end well. Daniel was upset. I heard Jessica in the background, her voice sharp with frustration. But I held firm. When Sunday came, I had the house spotless, the children's laundry done, and my bags packed by the door. Daniel and Jessica arrived looking tanned but tense. The children ran to greet them with excitement while I stood back, watching the family. Reunion with mixed emotions. "We need to talk," Daniel said to me after the initial flurry of hugs and exclamations. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "Not right now," I replied, picking up my bag. "I have that appointment I mentioned. We can talk later this week." I hugged the children, promised to see them soon, and walked out the door. As I drove home, my hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, but my resolve didn't waver. That evening, sitting in my own living room with a cup of tea, I pulled out the brochure for the Sedona workshop and smoothed its creased pages. Then, I went online and registered, paying the full amount without hesitation. After, I walked into my dusty art studio and uncovered the abandoned painting on the easel. The colors had faded, but they weren't beyond revival. I picked up a brush, dipped it in water, and began to bring the landscape back to life. The days that followed my stand with Daniel were quieter than I had experienced in years. My phone, usually buzzing with requests and updates, remained largely silent. The calendar on my refrigerator, typically crammed with soccer games and dance recitals, showed empty squares of possibility. I felt both liberated and oddly hollow, like a sailboat suddenly finding itself in still waters after years of choppy seas. I spent those first few days reclaiming my space and myself. I dusted off my art supplies, organized my brushes, and ordered fresh watercolors to replace the dried-out tubes. I reconnected with old friends, accepting lunch invitations I would have declined before. I even rejoined the senior yoga class at the Lakeside Community Center, surprising Martin Flores, the director, who welcomed me back with a knowing smile. "Wondered when we'd see you again?" he said, helping me fill out the registration form. "Your grandson's soccer schedule ease up?" The question was innocent but struck a nerve. Had I been that transparent? Had my entire community watched as I disappeared into my role as Daniel and Jessica's on-demand childcare? "Something like that," I replied, not ready to explain the recent shift. It was during that first yoga class, as I struggled through poses, that had once been easy for me, that I realized how much I'd physically neglected myself. My body felt stiff, uncooperative. The instructor, a serene woman in her 70s with remarkable flexibility, adjusted my position gently. "The body remembers what the mind tries to forget," she murmured. "Give yourself time to come back to yourself. Come back to myself." The phrase echoed as I drove home, windows down to let in the summer breeze. Who was I coming back to? The Maggie before retirement? Before widowhood? Before motherhood? I wasn't sure I remembered her clearly anymore. At a stoplight, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. Gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, reading glasses dangling from a chain. Around my neck, lines etched around my mouth and eyes, some from smiling, others from worry. Behind those familiar features, I searched for the woman who had once had dreams beyond family obligations, who had painted landscapes filled with light and possibility. The light changed, urging me forward. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Eleanor in her front yard, pruning her prized hydrangeas. She waved, garden shears in hand, and I walked over to the white picket fence that separated our properties. "You look different," she observed, studying me over her bifocals. "Lighter somehow." I leaned against the fence. I told Daniel no. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Well, well, look who finally found her backbone." We laughed, and I found myself recounting the FaceTime conversation, Daniel's phone call, and my quiet departure from their house. "And now?" Eleanor asked, setting down her shears. "Now nothing," I replied with a shrug. "My phone's been quiet. I'm not sure if that's punishment or just shock." Eleanor snorted. "Probably both. People don't like it when the furniture suddenly starts talking back." "Furniture?" "That's how they've been treating you, Maggie. Like a comfortable old chair that's always there when they want to sit down. Reliable, convenient, invisible. Until needed." The description stung with its accuracy. I'd allowed myself to become background furniture in my own family's life. Useful but unnoticed. Always present but never centered. "I registered for that painting workshop," I said, changing the subject. "The one in Sedona." Eleanor's face lit up. "Good for you. When is it?" "September. 10 days in the Red Rock country, painting from sunrise to sunset." The prospect filled me with a quiet excitement I hadn't felt in years. "Perfect timing," Eleanor nodded. "The children will be back in school by then." I hadn't even considered that. For the first time in recent memory, I'd made plans without checking Daniel and Jessica's schedule, without considering the children's activities or school holidays. I'd simply chosen something I wanted and claimed it. The realization must have shown on my face because Eleanor reached across the fence to pat my arm. That's how it's supposed to work, you know. Your life, your calendar. That evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, my phone rang. It was Jessica. I took a deep breath before answering. "Maggie," she began without preamble, her voice tight with what might have been irritation or something else entirely. "We need to talk about the summer schedule." I set down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables. "Hello to you too, Jessica." A brief pause. "Right, sorry." "Hello. Listen, we've got a situation. My mother was supposed to take the kids for the last 2 weeks of July while we're at the industry conference in Chicago, but she's just called to say she can't do it. Something about a cruise she booked months ago." My heart sank. 2 weeks. The conference Jessica mentioned was an annual event in the real estate world, something she'd been attending for years. Daniel usually went with her, turning it into a working vacation. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "That must be disappointing." Another pause, longer this time. "So, can you take them?" The directness of the question, without any acknowledgement of our recent tension, caught me off guard. Jessica was proceeding as if nothing had changed, as if my refusal to extend my stay had been an aberration rather than a boundary. "I'm not available for those 2 weeks, I said firmly, though my pulse quickened. "What do you mean, not available?" Jessica's voice rose slightly. "What could you possibly have scheduled for 2 entire weeks?" The dismissive tone, the assumption that my time couldn't possibly be filled with anything important, ignited something in me. "I don't actually need to justify my schedule to you, Jessica," I replied, keeping my voice level. "The fact is I'm not available." But this is important," she sputtered. "This conference is crucial for my business. The networking alone." "I understand that," I interrupted, "and I hope you find suitable childcare." "Suitable childcare? You're their grandmother," Yes, and I love them dearly. But I'm not their default caregiver when it's convenient for you and Daniel. Jessica's voice turned cold. I see. Well, I'll let Daniel know about your priorities. The call ended abruptly. I stood in my kitchen, trembling slightly, knowing I'd just escalated the situation. Yet beneath the anxiety, a kernel of pride took root. I had stood my ground. Again. The following day, Daniel called. I was in my art studio, working on a new painting, when his name flashed on my phone screen. I wiped my hands on a rag and answered. Mom, he began, his voice that particular blend of exasperation and forced patience I recognized from his teenage years. What's going on with you lately? Hello, Daniel, I replied. I'm fine, thank you for asking. How are you? A heavy sigh on the other end. Mom, Jessica told me about your conversation yesterday. I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this. The conference has been on our calendar for months. On your calendar, perhaps, I said. Not on mine. But you've always watched the kids during the conference, every year since you retired. His words gave me pause. He was right. For the past 3 years, I'd automatically blocked off those 2 weeks in July, arranging my life around their schedule without question. It had become such a given that they hadn't even bothered to ask this year, until Jessica's mother canceled. Things change, I said simply. What things? What's changed? Daniel's frustration was palpable. Is this about the Myrtle Beach thing? Because if you're still upset about that— This isn't about Myrtle Beach specifically, I interrupted. It's about a pattern that's developed over time, one where my availability is assumed rather than requested. A pattern? Daniel sounded genuinely confused. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. How could I make him understand what had become so clear to me? Daniel, when was the last time you asked if I was available before making plans that involved me watching the children? Silence. When was the last time you thanked me for rearranging my schedule to accommodate yours? Or asked about my plans, my interests, my life? More silence. You know I had to drop my book club because it conflicted with Lily's dance class? That I gave up yoga because it was during Ethan's soccer practice? That I haven't been able to take a painting workshop I've wanted to attend for 3 years because something always comes up with the children? Mom, that's what family does, Daniel finally said, his voice smaller. We help each other. Yes, we do, I agreed. But it should be mutual, Daniel. It should be a give and take, not just me giving and you taking. That's not fair, he protested, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Isn't it? When was the last time you offered to help me with something? When did you last check if I needed anything? Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his tone had shifted. So, you're just not going to help us anymore? Is that it? The question revealed so much about how he viewed the situation. In his mind, my boundary setting wasn't about reclaiming my autonomy. It was about withdrawing support, abandoning them. That's not what I'm saying, I explained patiently. I'm saying I need to be asked, not told. I need my time to be respected, not assumed. And sometimes, even when asked respectfully, the answer might be no because I have my own plans. Plans, Daniel repeated flatly. Like this painting thing. Yes, like the painting thing, I confirmed, refusing to let him diminish it. Art has always been important to me, Daniel. You used to know that. Another silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken history, of the years I'd set aside my brushes to raise him, of the brief renaissance after retirement, of the slow surrender to grandparenting duties. We really need help with the kids during the conference, Daniel finally said, his voice a mixture of stubbornness and something that might have been a grudging attempt at respect. Would you please consider watching them? We can work around any appointments you might have. It wasn't a perfect request, but it was progress. Still, I didn't waver. I'm sorry, but I've made other arrangements for those weeks. I'm not available. What I didn't tell him was that those other arrangements were simply plans to live my own life, to paint, to read, to join Eleanor for lunch, to attend yoga, classes to exist as Maggie Wilson rather than as Grandma on call. Daniel's disappointment was evident. Fine, we'll figure something out. After we hung up, I sat in my studio for a long time, watching the late afternoon light cast long shadows across my unfinished painting. The conversation had left me drained, but also strangely invigorated. Each time I held my ground, it became a little easier to remember who I was beyond my role as mother and grandmother. The next few days passed quietly. I fell into a rhythm of painting in the mornings, taking yoga class 3 times a week, and meeting Eleanor for coffee every Friday. One afternoon, I visited the Golden Years Center, curious about the boundaries at any age support group Eleanor had mentioned. The facilitator, Ruth Simmons, a warm-voiced widow with practical wisdom, welcomed me to observe. Many of us were raised in an era where family obligations were sacrosanct, Ruth explained after the session. Especially women. We were taught that our worth was tied to our caregiving, our self-sacrifice. Unlearning that is hard work. I nodded, recognizing myself in her words. My son thinks I'm abandoning them because I won't babysit for 2 weeks. Ruth's knowing smile told me she'd heard variations of this story many times before. They often do. When you've been the foundation for so long, they panic at the first sign of shift. But I'm not trying to punish them, I insisted. I just need to reclaim some part of myself. Of course you're not punishing them, Ruth agreed. But they might experience it that way at first. Change is uncomfortable for everyone involved. I left the center with Ruth's phone number and a promise to return the following week. Driving home, I reflected on how quickly I'd found a community of women my age who understood exactly what I was experiencing. Had they been there all along, waiting for me to look up from the demanding cycle of childcare and obligation? At home, I checked my answering machine out of habit, surprised to find a message from Jessica's mother, Patricia. We weren't close. Patricia lived across the country and had always been more hands-off as a grandmother than I had. Our interactions were typically limited to major holidays and occasional birthday calls. "Maggie, it's Patricia," her brisk voice announced. "Jessica mentioned you can't watch the children during their Chicago trip. I just wanted to touch base directly. Call me when you can." Curious, I returned her call immediately. Patricia answered on the second ring. "Thanks for calling back," she said without preamble. "Look, I'll be direct. Jessica seemed to think I'm taking a cruise during their conference, but that's not accurate. I do have a cruise booked, but it's in August, not July." I frowned, confused. "So you could watch the children during the conference?" "I could," Patricia confirmed. "But here's the thing, Maggie. I've already declined. Jessica didn't take it well, so I suspect she adjusted the timeline when explaining it to you." Something cold settled in my stomach. "I see." "Do you?" Patricia's tone sharpened. "Because it took me years to figure it out. Jessica has always been masterful at playing people against each other, especially when it comes to childcare. If I knew you had already said no, I might have reconsidered my position. That's how it works." The manipulation was so obvious now that Patricia pointed it out. Jessica had tried to use her mother's supposed unavailability to pressure me into relenting, probably assuming we wouldn't communicate directly. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Patricia sighed. "Because I spent years being the backup plan, the last resort, the reluctant grandmother who never quite measured up to St. Maggie who was always available. It's exhausting, and frankly, neither of us deserves it." Her words stung, but I recognized their truth. Without intending to, I had set an impossible standard, one that made Patricia look uninvolved by comparison and created an expectation that I would always be available. "What did you tell Jessica when you declined?" I asked, curious about how another grandmother had navigated these waters. "I told her that while I love Ethan and Lily, I have commitments I'm not willing to break. I suggested she look into summer camps or hiring a college student as a nanny. Practical solutions that didn't involve either grandmother sacrificing their plans. It seemed so obvious, yet it had apparently thrown Jessica and Daniel into a panic. "Thank you for telling me," I said sincerely. "I think we've both been manipulated more than we realized." Patricia made a sound of agreement. "Stand your ground, Maggie. They'll figure it out. They always do when they have no other choice." After we hung up, I sat in my living room processing this new information. The pattern was becoming clearer. Daniel and Jessica had grown accustomed to using both grandmothers as interchangeable childcare providers, playing us against each other when necessary. It wasn't just about my time being taken for granted. It was a deliberate strategy. That evening, I received a text from Daniel. "Found a summer program for the kids during our trip. Expensive but good activities. Would have been easier if family helped out, but will manage." The passive-aggressive tone wasn't subtle. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "I'm glad you found a good program for them. I'm sure they'll enjoy it." No apology, no guilt, no justification. Just acknowledgement and positive reinforcement. Ruth would be proud. The following week brought another test of my resolve. Jessica called on Tuesday afternoon, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Ethan has a fever. The school nurse called, but I'm in the middle of closing a major sale and Daniel's in meetings all day. Can you please pick him up?" This request was different, a genuine emergency rather than a convenience. I glanced at my schedule. I had yoga in an hour, but this was exactly the kind of situation where family should step up. "Of course I can get him," I said. "I'll head over right now." Jessica's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Maggie. I'll try to wrap things up early, but it might be a few hours." "That's fine," I assured her. "I'll take him to my place so he can rest." As I drove to the school, I reflected on the difference between this situation and the previous requests. This was urgent, unexpected, and Jessica had asked rather than assumed. It felt right to help in this circumstance, a freely given gift rather than an extracted obligation. Ethan was pale and miserable in the nurse's office, his normally energetic demeanor subdued by fever. His face brightened slightly when he saw me. "Grandma," he murmured, leaning against me as I signed him out. "I don't feel good." "I know, sweetheart," I said, guiding him to the car. "We'll get you home and comfortable." At my house, I settled him on the couch with a light blanket, a cool cloth for his forehead, and some children's fever reducer. As he dozed off, I moved my easel into the living room so I could paint while keeping an eye on him. The scrape of the easel legs against the hardwood floor woke him briefly. He blinked at me, then at the half-finished landscape I was working on. "That's pretty," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "I didn't know you could paint." The innocent observation hit me with unexpected force. My own grandson didn't know this fundamental thing about me. In his 9 years, he had never seen me as anything but his caretaker, his father's mother, a woman who appeared when needed and disappeared when not. "I've been painting since before your daddy was born," I told him, sitting on the edge of the couch. "I used to do it all the time when he was little." Ethan's fever-bright eyes studied me with new interest. "Can you teach me sometime? When I'm not sick?" "I'd love to," I said, smoothing his hair back from his hot forehead. "We'll set up a special day just for painting." He smiled faintly before drifting back to sleep. I returned to my easel, adding careful brush strokes to the canvas while occasionally checking on him. There was a certain peace in this moment, caring for my grandson while also honoring my own creativity, the two aspects of my life no longer in competition but in harmony. Jessica arrived around 6, looking harried but grateful. She paused when she saw my painting set up in the living room, her gaze moving from the canvas to Ethan asleep on the couch and back again. "You've been painting?" she asked, as if discovering I had suddenly learned to speak Mandarin. "I've been an artist all my life," I replied, setting down my brush. "I just took a break for a while." Jessica nodded absently, her attention already shifting to Ethan. "How is he?" "Fever's down a bit. He's been sleeping most of the afternoon." As Jessica gathered Ethan and his things, preparing to take him home, I noticed her glancing at my painting again. "It's good," she said awkwardly, as if complimenting a stranger. "The painting, I mean. I didn't realize." Daniel never mentioned, "You were artistic." Because Daniel had forgotten that part of me existed, or perhaps he had never truly seen it to begin with. "There's a lot about me that doesn't come up in conversations about childcare schedules," I said, keeping my tone light but pointed. Jessica had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Right. Well, thank you for today. I really appreciate it." "You're welcome," I said sincerely. "Any time for actual emergencies. That's what family is for." The emphasis on actual emergencies wasn't lost on her. She nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing her face before she helped a groggy Ethan to the car. After they left, I returned to my painting, adding final touches as the evening light faded. Today had clarified something important. Saying no to being taken advantage of didn't mean saying no to being a grandmother. It meant creating a healthier relationship with my family, one where I could be fully present when I did spend time with them because I was also honoring the other parts of myself. The painting workshop in Sedona was now just 6 weeks away. I'd started preparing, gathering supplies, and reading about the landscapes I would soon be capturing on canvas. Each day that passed without childcare demands felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. The woman who loved art and literature, who enjoyed quiet mornings with coffee and crosswords, who had interests and friendships that had nothing to do with her role as someone's mother or grandmother. That woman had never truly disappeared. She had simply been waiting, patient and persistent, for me to remember she existed. August arrived with a heat wave that seemed to shimmer above the asphalt and turn the air into something tangible. I kept my curtains drawn during the day, venturing out only in the early mornings for walks around Lake Haven Park before the sun reached its full strength. It was during one of these walks that I spotted Daniel across the lake, jogging along the path in athletic shorts and a moisture-wicking shirt. He hadn't seen me yet. I paused, watching him for a moment, struck by how much he resembled his father when in motion, the same determined stride, the slight forward tilt of the shoulders. James had been gone for 12 years now, but these fleeting moments of recognition still caught me by surprise, a bittersweet ache that had mellowed over time. I raised my hand to wave, but Daniel had already noticed me. He slowed his pace, then came to a complete stop. Even from this distance, I could see the moment of hesitation before he changed direction and jogged toward me. "Mom," he said, slightly out of breath as he reached me. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I walk most mornings," I replied. "Have been since May." Daniel nodded, a faint line appearing between his brows, the one that always showed up when he was processing new information that didn't fit his existing understanding. "Right? Makes sense." An awkward silence stretched between us. In the past, our conversations had always centered around the children or his work or some household task that needed attention. Without those familiar touch points, we seemed to have lost our bearings. "How are the kids?" I finally asked. His face relaxed into something more familiar. "Good. Ethan's soccer team made the regional finals." "And Lily?" He hesitated. Lily's been asking about you, actually. Wants to know why you haven't been over lately. A pang of guilt shot through me, quickly followed by a more measured response. I hadn't abandoned my grandchildren. I'd simply stopped being available on demand. I'd love to see them, I said sincerely. Perhaps we could arrange something? Maybe I could take them for ice cream this weekend? Daniel looked relieved, as if he'd been expecting rejection. That would be great. They'd like that. Saturday afternoon, I suggested. Around 2? Perfect. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, wiping sweat from his forehead. Listen, Mom, about the whole childcare thing. It's all right, I interrupted, not wanting to rehash old tensions in the middle of a public park. We're figuring it out as we go. Daniel nodded, though he looked as if he had more to say. Yeah, we are. He glanced at his fitness tracker. I should finish my run before heading to the office. Of course. I stepped aside to let him pass. See you Saturday. As he jogged away, I couldn't help but notice how formal our interaction had been, like distant relatives at a family reunion, rather than mother and son. Part of me mourned that distance, while another part recognized it as necessary growing pains as we established a healthier relationship. Saturday arrived bright and clear. I spent the morning in my studio, losing myself in a new watercolor study of Lake Haven at dawn, inspired by my morning walks. When I glanced at the clock, I was startled to see it was already 1:30. I quickly cleaned my brushes and changed into fresh clothes, arriving at Daniel and Jessica's precisely at 2. Lily flung open the door before I could ring the bell, launching herself into my arms with such force I nearly lost my balance. Grandma, you came! Her delight was unfeigned, her small arms tight around my neck as I bent to hug her. Of course. I came, sweetheart, I said, my heart swelling. I promised, didn't I? Ethan approached more cautiously, his 9-year-old dignity asserting itself, but his smile was genuine. Hi, Grandma. Jessica appeared in the hallway behind them, her expression carefully neutral. Hello, Maggie. Thanks for taking them out. Her tone was polite but reserved, lacking the easy familiarity we'd once shared. I understood her position. In her mind, I'd let them down during their time of need, disrupted their carefully arranged childcare system. From my perspective, I'd simply begun treating my time as valuable. Both views could exist simultaneously, I supposed. Happy to do it, I replied with equal politeness. We won't be too long. The local ice cream parlor, Sweet Scoops, was busy, with weekend customers, families crowding the colorful booths and spilling onto the outdoor patio. We found a small table by the window, the children's excitement palpable as they studied the elaborate menu of sundaes and splits. Can I get the chocolate explosion? Ethan asked, eyes wide at the description of 5 scoops with multiple toppings. That's enough sugar to power a small country, I said with a laugh. How about we each get a regular sundae today? He nodded, surprisingly agreeable. Okay, can I get extra whipped cream, though? Extra whipped cream is non-negotiable, I agreed solemnly, earning a grin. Lily was quieter than usual, studying me with an intensity surprising in a 6-year-old. After we ordered, she finally spoke up. Are you mad at us, Grandma? The question caught me off guard. Of course not, sweetheart. Why would you think that? She fidgeted with her napkin, folding it into smaller and smaller triangles. Because you don't come over anymore. Daddy said you're too busy. I glanced at Ethan, who was studiously looking out the window, though it was clear he was listening intently. So this was the narrative Daniel and Jessica had constructed to explain my absence. Not that boundaries had been set, but that Grandma was suddenly too busy for them. I'm never too busy for you, I said carefully. But you know how sometimes you need time to play with your toys or read your books by yourself. Lily nodded. Well, grandmas need that time too. Time for our own interests and friends and activities. Like painting? Ethan asked, finally turning back to the conversation. Dad said you used to paint a lot. I did, and I'm doing it again now, I confirmed. In fact, I'm going to a special painting workshop next month. Where? Lily wanted to know. In Sedona, Arizona. It's a beautiful place with red rocks and incredible sunsets. Will you paint pictures for us? Ethan asked. The question warmed me. I'd love to. Maybe one for each of your rooms? Both children nodded enthusiastically just as our ice cream arrived, momentarily diverting their attention. As they dug into their sundaes, I marveled at how straightforward the conversation had been. Children, unlike adults, were generally satisfied with simple truths, unburdened by layers of history and expectation. Grandma, Lily said between bites, ice cream smeared across her chin. Can we still do special things with you sometimes? Absolutely, I assured her. Days like today, for example. Or maybe you could come to my house occasionally and we could paint together. Ethan perked up at that suggestion. Really? You'd teach us? Of course. I've got plenty of supplies we could use. The relief on their faces was evident. They hadn't been worried about my availability for childcare. They'd been concerned about losing their grandmother. I'd been so focused on establishing boundaries with Daniel and Jessica that I hadn't fully considered how my apparent withdrawal might appear to the children. How about next weekend? I suggested. You could come over Saturday morning and we'd have an art day. If it's okay with your parents, of course. Both children nodded eagerly, ice cream forgotten for the moment. The rest of our outing passed in a blur of sticky hands and animated chatter as they caught me up on their summer activities, school preparations, and neighborhood gossip. By the time we returned to their house, the initial awkwardness had dissolved completely. Daniel was waiting in the living room, pretending to read a magazine but clearly anticipating our return. He looked up with barely disguised relief when we entered. Did you have fun? He asked the children, who immediately launched into an enthusiastic recounting of our afternoon, complete with descriptions of their ice cream selections and my promise of an art day. Can we, Dad? Can we go to Grandma's to paint next Saturday? Ethan asked, practically bouncing on his toes. Daniel glanced at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded slightly. If Grandma's offering, then yes, of course, he said. Where's Mom? Lily asked, looking around. She had a showing come up last night. Minute, Daniel explained. She'll be home for dinner. I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. I should get going. It was lovely spending time with you both, I told the children, bending to accept their enthusiastic hugs. Daniel followed me to the door. Thanks for taking them out. They've missed you. I've missed them too, I admitted. But that doesn't change anything about the boundaries I've set, Daniel. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that I almost smiled despite the tension. I know. It's been an adjustment. For all of us, I acknowledged. The summer program for the conference week is working out, he offered, almost reluctantly. The kids are actually looking forward to it. Ethan's friend from soccer is enrolled too. I nodded, pleased they'd found a solution but careful not to appear smug about it. That's good to hear. As I walked to my car, Daniel called after me. Mom, it's nice to see you painting again. Dad would be happy about that. The mention of James caught me by surprise. Daniel rarely spoke of his father anymore. Yes, I said softly. I think he would be. The following week passed quickly. I prepared for the children's visit by setting up 3 easels in the small sunroom off my kitchen, my professional one and 2 smaller ones I'd purchased years ago with the vague intention of teaching community classes after retirement. Fresh paper, student-grade watercolors, and an assortment of brushes were arranged on a folding table, along with cups for water and old shirts to serve as smocks. When Saturday arrived, I found myself unexpectedly nervous. These were my grandchildren, whom I'd cared for countless times, yet somehow this felt different, more vulnerable. I was sharing a core part of my identity with them, not just tending to their needs. They arrived promptly at 10, Jessica dropping them off with a quick hello and a promise to return at 2. Once they were settled in their makeshift smocks, old button-downs of James's that reached nearly to their knees, I began with a simple lesson on primary colors and basic brush techniques. Painting is about seeing, really seeing what's in front of you, I explained, demonstrating how to create a simple wash of blue for a sky. Not what you think should be there, but what actually is. Both children listened with surprising attention, their faces serious with concentration as they mimicked my brushstrokes. Lily's approach was bold and exuberant, her paper quickly awash in vibrant colors that bled into each other. Ethan was more methodical, carefully watching my every move before attempting his own version. "It doesn't look like yours," he said with disappointment, comparing his sky wash to mine. "It's not supposed to," I told him. "Every artist has their own hand, their own vision. That's what makes art special." He considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Like fingerprints." "Exactly like fingerprints," I agreed, delighted by the comparison. By noon, we had graduated from simple washes to attempting a basic landscape. The kitchen table was covered with their practice sheets, some more successful than others, but all approached with genuine enthusiasm. When it was time for lunch, I had to practically pry the brushes from their hands. "Can we keep painting after we eat?" Lily asked, carefully washing her hands at the kitchen sink. "Of course. We still have the whole afternoon." Over sandwiches and apple slices, the conversation drifted to my upcoming workshop. I showed them pictures of Sedona online, the magnificent red rock formations and sweeping vistas that had captivated artists for generations. "That's where you're going alone?" Ethan asked, studying the images with interest. "Yes, for 10 days in September." "Aren't you scared?" Lily wanted to know. "To go so far away by yourself?" The question gave me pause. "A little," I admitted. "It's been a long time since I traveled alone, but sometimes it's good to do things that make you a little scared. It helps you grow." Ethan nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. "Like when I tried the high dive at the pool." "Exactly like that," I agreed. After lunch, we returned to painting with renewed energy. By the time Jessica arrived to pick them up, each child had completed a simple landscape. Their pride was evident as they carefully carried their creations to the car, Lily providing a detailed explanation of her artistic process to her mother, who listened with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Thank you for today," Jessica said as the children buckled themselves in. "They've obviously had a wonderful time." "It was my pleasure," I replied sincerely. "We should do it again sometime." For the first time in months, Jessica's smile seemed authentic. They'd like that. As they drove away, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. I had shared something meaningful with my grandchildren, not just my time or attention, but a piece of who I was fundamentally. And in doing so, I had begun to bridge the distance that had formed between us, but on terms that honored my newfound boundaries. The following week, Eleanor and I met for coffee at the Daily Grind, our regular Friday morning ritual. As I recounted the painting day with my grandchildren, Eleanor listened with a knowing smile. "It's starting to work, isn't it?" she observed. "The new dynamic." "Slowly," I admitted. "There are still moments of tension, especially with Jessica. But with the children, it's almost easier now, more authentic somehow." Eleanor stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Because you're showing them the real you, not just the convenient version." The statement resonated deeply. For years, I had presented a carefully curated version of myself to my family, endlessly accommodating, without needs or desires that might inconvenience them. The real Maggie, with her passion for art and literature, her need for solitude, her own dreams and plans, had been relegated to the background. "Speaking of the real you," Eleanor continued, "are you ready for Sedona?" It's coming up soon, isn't it? 3 weeks, I confirmed. And yes, I think I am ready. I've been painting almost every day, trying to get back into form. What I didn't mention was the slight undercurrent of anxiety that accompanied my anticipation. It had been decades since I'd traveled anywhere alone, without James or Daniel, or, more recently, the grandchildren. The prospect was both exhilarating and intimidating. "You're going to love it," Eleanor assured me. My niece went to a similar workshop in Taos last year, said it was transformative. "That's what I'm hoping for," I admitted. "A transformation of sorts." Back home, I spent the afternoon organizing my art supplies for the workshop, taking inventory of what I had and what I might need to purchase. When my phone rang, I was surprised to see Ruth Simmons's name on the screen. We had spoken a few times since I'd attended the Boundaries at Any Age group, but not recently. "Maggie," Ruth said warmly when I answered. "I hope I'm not interrupting. Anything important?" "Not at all," I assured her. "Just sorting through art supplies." "Perfect timing, then. I'm calling because we're planning a special session next Wednesday focused specifically on grandparenting boundaries. I thought of you immediately. The topic couldn't have been more relevant to my current situation." "That sounds wonderful. I'll be there." "Excellent. And if you're comfortable, we'd love to have you share some of your recent experiences. Your situation has resonated with many of our members." The request caught me off guard. "Share my experiences, as in speak to the group?" "Nothing formal," Ruth clarified. "Just part of the general discussion. Your perspective would be valuable, especially given the progress you've made." Progress. The word struck me as both accurate and somewhat amusing. In many ways, I was still at the beginning of this journey, still figuring out how to balance my newfound independence with my love for my family. "I'd be happy to contribute," I said, surprising myself with my willingness. After hanging up, I returned to my supply inventory with renewed purpose. The workshop in Sedona wasn't just a painting retreat. It was a symbol of the changes I'd been making, a concrete manifestation of my commitment to honoring my own needs and interests. The following Monday, an unexpected text from Daniel appeared. On my phone. "Kids have half-day Wednesday. Any chance you're free to pick them up from school? Would be a huge help." I paused, considering how to respond. This was a straightforward request, not an assumption or a demand, and Daniel was asking with proper notice rather than last-minute desperation. Yet it happened to conflict with the Boundaries session at Golden Year Center that Ruth had invited me to participate in. In the past, I would have automatically rearranged my plans to accommodate Daniel's request. Now, I carefully weighed my options. The session was important to me, not just as an attendee, but as a contributor. It was an opportunity to solidify my own understanding of healthy boundaries while potentially helping others in similar situations. "I have a prior commitment on Wednesday afternoon," I texted back. "But I could suggest an alternative if you'd like." Daniel's response came quickly. "What alternative?" "I could pick them up Thursday instead if that would help. Or I'm free. Friday afternoon." A longer pause this time before his reply. "Thursday would work. Jessica has showings all afternoon. Could you get them at 3:30 and keep them until dinner?" "Happy to," I confirmed. "I'll pick them up from school and take them to my house. What time would you like me to bring them home?" 6:30? I'll make sure dinner is ready." "Perfect. See? You then." The exchange left me with a sense of quiet satisfaction. I had maintained my boundary around Wednesday's commitment, while still offering support on terms that worked for me. And Daniel had accepted the alternative without argument. Or guilt-tripping. Progress indeed. Wednesday's session at the Golden Year Center exceeded my expectations. The room was fuller than usual, with perhaps 20 seniors gathered in a loose circle, most of them women, but a few men as well. Ruth welcomed everyone warmly before introducing the topic. "Grandparenting is often described as pure joy. all. The fun of parenting with none of the responsibility, she began. But for many of us, the reality is quite different. Today, we're discussing how to establish and maintain healthy boundaries while still nurturing those precious relationships. The discussion that followed was both validating and illuminating. I wasn't alone in my struggles. Around the circle, grandparents shared similar experiences of being taken for granted, of having their time and energy assumed rather than requested, of feeling trapped between their love for their grandchildren and their desire for independence. When Ruth invited me to share my recent experiences, I found myself speaking with unexpected emotion about the journey of the past few months, from the Myrtle Beach ultimatum to the painting day with my grandchildren. The hardest part, I concluded, has been letting go of the guilt. We were raised to believe that family always comes first, that self-sacrifice is the ultimate virtue for mothers and grandmothers. Unlearning that has been challenging. Heads nodded around the circle. An older gentleman in a plaid shirt spoke up for the first time. My daughter doesn't understand why I can't just drop everything to babysit whenever she calls. She thinks retirement means I have nothing but free time. Exactly, a silver-haired woman agreed. There's this assumption that our lives are somehow less valuable, less structured, less important than theirs. The key, Ruth interjected gently, is remembering that saying no to being taken advantage of isn't the same as saying no to the relationship. In fact, it can ultimately strengthen it by making it more equitable and respectful. Those words resonated deeply with me. I wasn't withdrawing from my family. I was reshaping our relationship into something healthier and more balanced. The grandchildren's visit to my art studio had demonstrated that perfectly. A meaningful connection built on mutual interest and respect rather than obligation. After the session, several participants approached me privately to share their own stories or to thank me for articulating feelings they'd struggled to express. One woman, who introduced herself as Martha, pressed a small card into my hand. It's a quote that helped me when I was where you are now, she explained. Later, in my car, I read the handwritten words. The only person you should try to be better than is the person you were yesterday. It wasn't attributed to anyone, but the sentiment perfectly captured what I'd been working toward. Not comparing myself to other grandmothers or to some idealized standard of self-sacrifice, but simply trying to be more authentic, more self-respecting than I had been before. Thursday afternoon, I picked up Ethan and Lily from school as arranged. They bounded into my car with their usual energy, backpacks seemingly larger than they were. Can we paint again? Lily asked immediately. If you'd like, I agreed. Or we could do something else. It's your choice. Ethan considered this. Could we maybe bake cookies? Dad said you used to make really good chocolate chip cookies when he was little. The request surprised me. Daniel rarely spoke about his childhood to the children, at least not in my presence. The fact that he'd mentioned something as ordinary as my cookies felt significant somehow. We certainly could bake cookies, I said. I think I have all the ingredients at home. The afternoon unfolded in a cloud of flour and laughter. The children proved to be enthusiastic if messy bakers, and by 5 o'clock, several dozen slightly misshapen but delicious chocolate chip cookies were cooling on racks around my kitchen. Dad's going to be so happy, Ethan said, carefully packaging a selection of cookies in a container I'd provided. These are even better than the ones from the bakery. That's because they're made with love, Lily declared with the certainty only a 6-year-old can muster. Right, Grandma? Absolutely right, I agreed, tapping her flour-dusted nose affectionately. As promised, I delivered them home at 6:30. Daniel answered the door in an apron, the smell of spaghetti sauce wafting from the kitchen behind him. Right on time, he said with a smile. How was your afternoon? We made your cookies, Ethan announced, proudly presenting the container. The ones you told us about. Daniel's expression softened as he accepted the gift. Mom's famous chocolate chip cookies? Wow, I haven't had these in years. You'll have to share, I teased gently. We'll see about that, he replied with a wink toward the children, who giggled. The moment was easy, natural, the kind of warm, family interaction that had once been commonplace but had become increasingly rare as tensions rose over childcare expectations. It felt like a glimpse of what our relationship could be moving forward, loving and supportive, but with healthy boundaries intact. As I drove home, I reflected on the changes of the past few months. The journey had not been easy, and there were, undoubtedly, more challenging conversations ahead. But for the first time, I could clearly envision a future where I was both a devoted grandmother and a woman with her own fulfilling life, not one at the expense of the other, but both in balanced harmony. The Sedona workshop was now just 2 weeks away. Each passing day brought me closer to this significant milestone, this declaration of independence and self-respect. I had stood my ground, weathered the initial resistance, and begun to forge a new kind of relationship with my family, one based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. As Martha's card had suggested, I was becoming better than the person I had been yesterday. Not perfect, not without doubts or occasional backsliding, but steadily moving forward on the path I had chosen for myself. The road ahead might still have bumps, but I now had faith in my ability to navigate them without losing myself along the way. The week before my departure for Sedona, I received an unexpected invitation, a text from Jessica asking if I'd like to join them for dinner on Saturday evening. Just the adults, she specified. Daniel's parents are taking the kids overnight. I read the message several times, trying to discern the intent behind it. Was this an olive branch, a peace offering before my trip? Or perhaps they had some new request they thought would be better presented in person, over a meal where social niceties might make it harder for me to refuse. After some consideration, I replied, "Thank you for the invitation. I'd be happy to join you." Whatever their motivation, I decided to approach the evening with an open mind. The past weeks had shown glimmers of a new understanding between us. Perhaps this dinner was simply an opportunity to build on that foundation. Saturday evening brought a gentle rain that pattered against my windshield as I drove to Daniel and Jessica's house. The neighborhood streets glistened under the streetlights, and the glow from windows created inviting rectangles of warmth against the gray dusk. I parked in their driveway behind Daniel's car, noting Jessica's wasn't there yet. Likely, she was showing a property, as weekend evenings were prime time in her business. Daniel opened the door before I could ring the bell, greeting me with a kiss on the cheek and taking my rain jacket. "Perfect timing," he said. "Jessica just called. She's on her way. Her showing ran long." The house was uncharacteristically quiet without the children's energy. As Daniel led me to the living room, I noticed small changes since my last visit. New throw pillows on the sofa, framed photographs I hadn't seen before, including one of the children with me from our painting day, their proud smiles showcasing their finished landscapes. "Can I get you something to drink?" Daniel offered. "Wine?" I opened a nice Cabernet. "That would be lovely," I agreed, settling onto the sofa. Daniel disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with 2 generously filled glasses. He handed one to me, then sat in the armchair adjacent to the sofa rather than across the room, a small gesture that didn't escape my notice. "Dinner's almost ready," he said. "Just waiting on the roast to rest. Jessica wanted to try that recipe you used to make, the one with rosemary and garlic." I couldn't hide my surprise. My pot roast recipe? I didn't think Jessica was interested in my cooking. Daniel had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "She's been asking more questions about you lately. About what you were like when I was growing up, things you used to do." "Has she now?" I took a sip of wine, considering this information. "That's unexpected." Daniel swirled the wine in his glass, watching the ruby liquid cling to the sides. "I think she's trying to understand you better. We both are. Before I could respond, the front door opened, bringing a gust of cool air and the sound of Jessica's voice calling out, "I'm home! Sorry I'm late!" She appeared in the doorway a moment later, professionally dressed but slightly dampened by the rain, her usually perfect hair frizzed at the edges. "Maggie, you're here already." "Wonderful." Her smile seemed genuine if a bit harried. "Let me just freshen up quickly and we can eat." As she hurried upstairs, Daniel and I fell into somewhat stilted conversation about the weather, his work, and my upcoming trip. There was an underlying tension to the exchange, both of us seemingly waiting for Jessica's return before addressing anything of substance. When Jessica rejoined us 15 minutes later, changed into more casual clothes with her hair smoothed back, the dining room table was already set. Daniel had moved efficiently during her absence, transferring serving dishes from kitchen to table, lighting candles and pouring water. "It smells amazing," I commented as we took our seats. "Just like when Daniel was little." Jessica beamed. "I followed your recipe exactly. Daniel found it in that old notebook you gave him years ago." The meal began with pleasant, if somewhat cautious, conversation. We discussed the children's school preparations for the fall, Jessica's real estate market, and Daniel's recent promotion at work. It was the kind of surface-level family chat we might have had at any Sunday dinner in the past, yet something felt different. There was an attentiveness from both Daniel and Jessica that had been missing before. They asked follow-up questions about my plans for Sedona, seemed genuinely interested in the workshop curriculum, and didn't interrupt when I spoke. As Daniel served coffee and Jessica brought out a store-bought cheesecake for dessert, I finally addressed the elephant in the room. "This has been lovely," I said, setting down my coffee cup. "But I'm curious about the occasion. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss?" Daniel and Jessica exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that develops between couples over years of shared experiences. Jessica nodded slightly, and Daniel cleared his throat. "Actually, yes," he admitted. "We wanted to talk to you before you leave for your trip." I steeled myself, expecting perhaps another childcare request or some new expectation they hoped I would fulfill upon my return from Sedona. "Mom," Daniel began carefully, "Jessica and I have been doing a lot of thinking, and, well, we owe you an apology." Of all the things I had anticipated, an apology wasn't among them. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "We've taken you for granted," he said, his voice containing a hint of the little boy who had once tearfully confessed to breaking my favorite vase. "For years, really. We assumed your time was always available to us, that our needs automatically came before yours." Jessica leaned forward, her expression serious. "When you first started setting boundaries, I was angry. I thought you were being selfish, choosing yourself over family." "Over the children," I corrected gently. "Yes," she acknowledged with a faint flush. "That's exactly it. In my mind, saying no to us was the same as saying no to Ethan and Lily. But that's not fair, is it? They're our responsibility, not yours." The frankness of her admission took me aback. "What changed your perspective?" Jessica glanced at Daniel before answering. "Honestly? A few things. Seeing how much the children enjoyed their time with you when it was on your terms, they couldn't stop talking about the painting day. And then, watching my mother cancel on us without a second thought. That was illuminating," Daniel admitted. "She didn't even offer alternatives like you did. Just said no and went on her cruise." "And the programs we found for them during our conference?" Jessica added. "Ethan and Lily loved them. They made new friends, tried activities we'd never have thought to introduce them to. Sometimes what seems like a setback actually opens up new opportunities." I took a sip of my coffee, processing their words. The conversation was heading in a direction I hadn't anticipated, and I wanted to give it the thoughtfulness it deserved. "There's something else," Daniel said, his voice growing softer. I spoke with Dad's sister last month, Aunt Claire. I raised an eyebrow. Claire lived across the country and rarely kept in touch. She and James had never been particularly close, their relationship cordial but distant. She mentioned something that's been on my mind ever since, Daniel continued. She said that after I was born, you gave up a scholarship to that art program in New York. I never knew about that. The memory surfaced like a stone rising from the bottom of a lake, the thick envelope with the acceptance letter. The elation followed swiftly by the realization that I couldn't possibly leave my infant son and husband to study painting in New York for a year. I had tucked the letter away without mentioning it to anyone except James, who had offered to make it work somehow, but seemed relieved when I declined. It wasn't the right time, I said simply. We were just starting our family. But it was important to you, Daniel pressed. Claire said you'd been working toward that opportunity for years. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Life is full of choices. I made mine. And then you made more choices, Jessica said quietly. To be available whenever we needed you. To drop your plans when the children had activities. To put yourself last, always. I did those things because I wanted to, I pointed out. Because I love all of you? We know that, Daniel said. But love shouldn't require self-erasure, should it? That's what we've been thinking about. How we expected you to just disappear as a person with needs and interests outside of being our mother and the kid's grandmother. The accuracy of his assessment brought a lump to my throat. Self-erasure. The term perfectly captured what had happened gradually over the years. The slow fading of Maggie Wilson, the artist, the reader, the woman with dreams and plans, replaced by Maggie, the ever-available caregiver. Ethan asked me last week why I never knew you were an artist, Jessica said, breaking the momentary silence. I didn't have a good answer for him. How could I not know such a fundamental thing about my children's grandmother after all these years? And then I realized I never asked. I never thought to ask about who you were beyond how you could be useful to us. Her candor was disarming. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. Thank you for recognizing that now. Daniel leaned forward, his expression earnest. We want things to be different moving forward, Mom. We want to respect your time and your life. We want the kids to know you, really know you, not just as the person who watches them when we're busy. That means a lot to me, I said, my voice steadier than I expected given the emotion welling inside me. We've made some changes already, Jessica added. We enrolled the children in after-school programs 3 days a week for the fall. And we've interviewed college students who can provide regular evening babysitting. And we've implemented what Jessica calls the request rule, Daniel said with a small smile. No assumptions about your availability, ever. Proper notice for any childcare requests, and absolutely no guilt-tripping if you say no. The thoughtfulness behind these changes touched me deeply. They had not only heard my concerns but had taken concrete steps to address them, steps that required effort and planning on their part. I don't know what to say, I admitted. This is more than I expected. We've been unfair to you, Jessica said simply. We want to make it right. And we want you to know, Daniel added, that we support your Sedona trip completely. No last-minute emergencies, no calls asking when you'll be back. This is your time, and you've more than earned it. A weight I hadn't fully acknowledged seemed to lift from my shoulders. The fact that they not only accepted but actively supported my journey meant more than I could express. The conversation shifted then to more practical matters. They showed me the calendar they'd created with the children's fall activities, the contact information for the college student they'd hired as a regular sitter, the details of the after-school programs. Everything was meticulously organized, requiring no input or assistance from me. One more thing, Jessica said as we finished our coffee. We'd like to host a small gathering when you return from Sedona. Nothing elaborate, Just a chance for you to share your experience and maybe show some of your work from the workshop. Only if you're comfortable with that, of course. The gesture was unexpected and touching, an acknowledgement of my passion, a desire to celebrate rather than minimize it. I'd like that very much, I said sincerely. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable shift that had occurred. What had begun as my personal boundary setting had evolved into something larger, a realignment of our entire family dynamic, a recognition that mutual respect strengthened rather than diminished our bonds. Daniel walked me to my car, holding an umbrella over both of us as the rain continued to fall gently. At my car door, he hesitated, then pulled me into a hug. "I'm sorry it took us so long to understand," he murmured. "Dad would be disappointed in me." I pulled back to look at him, surprised by the reference to his father. "What makes you say that?" Daniel's expression was thoughtful in the dim light. He always told me to pay attention to the quiet sacrifices, that they were the ones that cost the most. I didn't really understand what he meant until recently. James had indeed been attuned to such things, noticing the small ways people adjusted their lives to accommodate others, often at personal cost. It had been one of his most endearing qualities, his ability to see beyond the surface to the unspoken givings and takings that shaped relationships. "Your father would be proud of the man you've become," I assured him, "especially now." The week that followed brought final preparations for my Sedona journey. I packed my art supplies with meticulous care, selecting brushes and papers and paints with the reverence of a pilgrim preparing for a sacred ritual. My suitcase contained light, comfortable clothing suitable for desert days and cool evenings, sturdy walking shoes for exploring the landscape, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield me from the southwestern sun. Eleanor came over the day before my departure, bearing a gift, a beautiful leather-bound sketchbook. "For your thoughts and impressions," she explained. "Sometimes words capture what paint cannot." Ruth called to wish me well and to remind me that the boundaries at any age group would be eager to hear about my experiences upon my return. "You're becoming something of an inspiration, you know," she told me. "Several members have started setting their own boundaries after hearing your story. Even Patricia, Jessica's mother, sent a brief text. Enjoy your workshop. Boundaries are beautiful things." The morning of my departure dawned clear and bright. I had arranged for a car service to take me to the airport, insisting that Daniel and Jessica not disrupt their workday. Still, I was surprised to hear a car in my driveway an hour before my scheduled pickup time. Looking out the window, I saw not the expected town car, but Daniel's SUV. All four of them, Daniel, Jessica, Ethan, and Lily, piled out, the children carrying handmade cards and a small gift bag. "Surprise!" Lily called out as I opened the door. "We came to say goodbye." Ethan handed me the gift bag solemnly. "It's for your trip, so you don't forget us while you're painting." Inside was a small frame containing a photograph of the four of them, taken recently based on their summer tans and the children's current heights. On the back, each had written a short message. "Have an amazing time. Can't wait to see your paintings." Daniel, enjoy every moment. You deserve this." Jessica, paint some awesome pictures. Love you. Ethan, I'm proud of you, Grandma. Lily, with help spelling, I suspected. Lily's message in particular brought tears to my eyes. Proud of me. Such a simple sentiment, yet it captured everything about our evolving relationship. The recognition that I was a person with my own accomplishments and aspirations, worthy of pride just as they were worthy of mine. "We wanted to see you off properly," Jessica explained. "The children have been planning this all week." "We'll drive you to the airport," Lily announced. "Daddy said we can go all the way to the security line." Daniel shrugged, smiling. "If that's okay with you? We thought it might be nicer than a taxi." "It's perfect," I assured them, touched beyond words by the gesture. The drive to the airport was filled with the children's excited chatter about what I might see in Arizona, interspersed with last-minute questions about when exactly I would return, and promises to water my plants in my absence. There was no talk of childcare schedules or logistical arrangements, just family sharing in the anticipation of an adventure. At the airport drop-off, the children hugged me tightly, extracting promises for postcards and souvenirs. Jessica embraced me next, whispering, "Thank you for teaching us all a valuable lesson." Daniel was last, his hug reminiscent of his childhood, tight and slightly too long, as if hesitant to let go. "Have the time of your life, Mom," he said. "You've earned every minute of it." As I walked toward the terminal, rolling my suitcase, behind me, I turned once to wave. They were still there, all four of them, waving back enthusiastically. The sight filled me with a complex emotion, not the guilt or anxiety I might have felt months ago at leaving them, but a warm certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I needed to do. The security line moved quickly for a morning flight. As I placed my carry-on on the conveyor belt, I noticed the TSA agent glancing at my boarding pass. "Sedona?" she commented. "Beautiful place. Special occasion?" "Yes," I replied with a smile. "It's a painting workshop, something I've wanted to do for years." "Traveling alone?" she asked, in that way security personnel have of making casual conversation while assessing passengers. "Yes," I said again, the word feeling more powerful each time I spoke it. "Just me." Her eyes crinkled with a smile above her mask. "Good for you. Enjoy every minute." Beyond security, the airport terminal buzzed with morning activity, business travelers tapping on laptops, families corralling sleepy children, baristas crafting elaborate coffee drinks for the caffeine-deprived. I found a quiet corner near my gate and took out my phone, intending to send a quick text to Eleanor letting her know I'd arrived safely at the airport. To my surprise, I had several unread messages, one from Ruth wishing me a safe journey, another from Martha of the Boundaries group sending good thoughts, and even one from Martin at the community center reminding me that my spot in yoga class would be waiting upon my return. The realization struck me powerfully. In the month since I'd begun setting boundaries with my family, I had rebuilt a community of my own. These people, Eleanor, Ruth, Martha, Martin, and others, had entered my life not because of my relation to someone else, but because of who I was in my own right. They valued me as Maggie the artist, Maggie the friend, Maggie the woman with thoughts and interests and boundaries. Boarding began about 20 minutes later. As I settled into my window seat, I felt a sense of profound rightness. 6 months ago, I would never have imagined myself here, alone on a plane bound for Arizona, art supplies carefully packed, a workshop awaiting that was entirely for my own fulfillment. The journey ahead was not just geographical, but symbolic, a physical manifestation of the internal journey I'd been on since that first refusal to extend my childcare duties. The plane began its taxi down the runway, gathering speed until the Atskau, moment of liftoff, when gravity yielded to flight. As we climbed above lakeside heights, I caught a glimpse of familiar landmarks, the lake glinting in the morning sun, the community center where I'd found unexpected support, the neighborhood where my small ranch house sat. From this height, everything looked different, the details blurring into patterns, the whole more apparent than its parts. Like my own life, I thought. Sometimes you need distance to see the patterns, to understand the choices that have shaped you and the changes still possible. The plane banked west, and lakeside heights disappeared beneath a layer of clouds. Ahead lay Sedona, with its red rocks and artist community, its transformative landscape and new possibilities. For 10 days, I would be simply Maggie Wilson, artist and student, absorbing new techniques and perspectives, creating work that expressed my unique vision. And then I would return. Not to the life I had left, but to something new and still, evolving. A life where I was both grandmother and artist, both nurturer and individual, both giver and receiver. A life of balance rather than sacrifice, of boundaries that strengthened rather than diminished relationships. As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, I took out the small sketchbook Eleanor had given me and began to write. Not about the past, or even the present, but about the future I now knew was possible. A future where standing up for myself didn't mean standing apart from those I loved, but rather standing more authentically within the circle of family and community. The revelation was as clear as the sky outside my window. In reclaiming myself, I hadn't lost my family. I had, instead, created the foundation for a more genuine connection with them, one based on mutual respect rather than expectation, on love freely given rather than obligation grudgingly fulfilled. It wasn't perfect, and there would undoubtedly be missteps and readjustments ahead, but the direction was set. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the flight attendants began their service. I accepted a cup of tea and turned back to my window, watching the landscape unfold beneath us, cities giving way to countryside, green forests yielding to golden plains, human constructions dwarfed by the grandeur of nature. Like the changing landscape below, my life had entered a new terrain, one with different contours and colors, different challenges and rewards. The journey had begun with a simple no to an unreasonable request, but it had expanded into something far more significant, a reclamation of self, a redistribution of responsibilities, a rebalancing of relationships. I thought of Lily's message on the photograph. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," and smiled. Yes, this was something to be proud of. This difficult, necessary work of setting boundaries and standing firm. It had taken courage and persistence, weathering discomfort and resistance. But the rewards were already evident. Greater authenticity with my family, renewed creative expression, expanded community connections, and most importantly, a deeper relationship with myself. The plane continued westward, carrying me toward Sedona and the next chapter of my journey. But in many ways, I had already arrived at my destination, a place of greater balance and truth, where saying yes to myself didn't mean saying no to those I loved, but rather created space for all of us to thrive in honest relationship. Outside my window, the horizon stretched endlessly, a reminder of the possibilities still waiting to unfold. Sedona exceeded every expectation. The landscape alone would have been enough. Those magnificent red rock formations that changed color. With the shifting light, from deep rust at dawn, to brilliant vermilion at midday, to soft coral at sunset. But coupled with the workshop experience, it became truly transformative. Our instructor, Vivian Morales, was a force of nature herself. A 75-year-old painter with wild silver curls and turquoise jewelry who had been capturing the Southwest on canvas for over 50 years. She pushed us beyond technical skill into something more profound, more personal. "Don't paint what you see," she would say, gesturing toward Cathedral Rock or Bell Tower with a brush-laden hand. "Paint what you feel when you see it. Anyone can copy nature. Artists translate it." There were 12 of us in the workshop, ranging in age from a 30-something graphic designer on sabbatical to an 82-year-old retired physician. Each morning began with demonstrations and technical instruction, followed by afternoons in the field, setting up our easels on carefully selected sites that Vivian insisted offered the perfect dialogue between light and stone. The evenings were for critique and camaraderie, gathering in the lodge's common room to discuss our day's work over wine and locally sourced cheese. It was during these sessions that I found myself opening up about my journey. Not just as an artist, but as a woman reclaiming her identity after decades of putting others first. "It's the most common story in the world," Vivian commented one evening after I'd shared some of my experiences with Daniel and Jessica. Women of our generations were taught that selflessness was next to godliness, that loving others meant erasing ourselves. Nancy, the retired physician, nodded emphatically. I delayed medical school for 10 years because my husband's career came first. When I finally did it, my mother-in-law asked who would cook his dinners. Laughter rippled through the group, but there was recognition in it, the shared understanding of women who had navigated similar waters. The miracle, Vivian continued, studying my painting from that day, a rendering of Courthouse Butte in afternoon light, is that we find our way back to ourselves. Look at this work, Maggie. There's liberation in these brush strokes. I hadn't thought of my painting in those terms, but looking at it through her eyes, I could see what she meant. My earlier work from my studio at home had been careful, controlled, every stroke deliberate and somewhat hesitant. These Sedona paintings were different, more confident, more expressive, taking risks with color and composition that would have intimidated me before. Your work is evolving just as you are, Vivian observed, a statement that resonated far beyond my canvas. By the 5th day, I had filled half the sketchbook Eleanor had given me with notes, observations, and quick studies of the landscape. I'd also used it as a journal of sorts, recording not just techniques learned, but insights gained, both artistic and personal. One entry particularly captured my state of mind. Today, Vivian talked about negative space, the areas around and between subjects that are just as important as the subjects themselves. She said beginners focus only on the main objects, forgetting that the spaces between define those objects just as clearly. I keep thinking about this in relation to my life. All these years I've focused on the subjects, Daniel, Jessica, the grandchildren, without honoring the necessary negative space around them. The boundaries, the separation that actually defines our relationships more clearly and allows each element its proper place in the composition. The workshop days passed quickly, each filled with new challenges and breakthroughs. I called home just once, speaking briefly with Daniel to confirm all was well. True to his promise, he asked nothing about my return, only whether I was enjoying myself and if the workshop was meeting my expectations. It's extraordinary, I told him. I'm learning so much. I can hear it in your voice, he replied. You sound different, happy. I am, I confirmed, realizing the simple truth of it. I was happy, deeply, authentically happy in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Good, he said. That's all that matters. On our final evening, Vivian organized an informal exhibition of our work in the lodge's gathering space. Each participant selected 3 pieces that represented their journey during the workshop. I chose my first day's tentative study of Belle, Rock, a mid-workshop painting of coffee pot rock that showed my growing confidence, and my final piece, a panoramic view of Cathedral Rock reflected in Oak Creek, that Vivian had declared a genuine breakthrough. As we toasted each other and celebrated our artistic growth, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led to this moment, from that first difficult no regarding the Myrtle Beach vacation extension to the dinner with Daniel and Jessica before my departure. The journey hadn't been linear. There had been steps forward and back, moments of doubt and moments of clarity. But the trajectory had been steadily upward, toward greater self-knowledge and stronger, healthier relationships. The morning of our departure, Vivian took me aside as we packed our supplies. You're going home a different woman than the one who arrived, she said, her eyes bright with understanding. Remember that they'll be expecting the old Maggie. Give them time to know this new one. Her words proved prophetic. When I arrived at Lakeside Airport, Daniel was waiting at the baggage claim, a bouquet of autumn flowers in hand. His smile was warm, but I caught the flicker of surprise in his eyes as he took me in, as if he were seeing a stranger wearing his mother's face. Welcome home, he said, embracing me. You look different. I laughed. It's just a tan, and maybe a few new wrinkles from squinting in the desert sun. But it was more than that, and we both knew it. The physical changes were minimal, perhaps a bit more definition in my posture, a new lightness in my step. but the internal transformation was profound and somehow visible on the surface. "The kids can't wait to see you," he said as we loaded my luggage into his car. "They've been counting down the days. Lily even made a paper chain to tear off one link each morning." The thought of my grandchildren eagerly anticipating my return filled me with warmth. I've missed them too. And I've brought them something special. In addition to the obligatory souvenirs, turquoise bracelets and miniature cacti that wouldn't last a month in our climate, I had painted 2 small studies specifically for their rooms. Ethan's captured the dramatic red cliffs against an azure sky, while Lily's featured a sunset palette with a small hummingbird hovering near blooming cacti. "You painted those for them?" Daniel asked, glancing at the carefully wrapped canvases on the back seat. "They'll be thrilled." "I thought they might enjoy having original art," I said. "Something uniquely theirs." As we drove through familiar streets toward my house, Daniel filled me in on the happenings of the past 10 days. Ethan's soccer team advancing to state finals, Lily being selected for a special reading program, Jessica closing on a luxury property she'd been pursuing for months. Normal family updates, shared without expectation or agenda. "And what about you?" I asked. "How did the childcare arrangements work out while I was away?" Daniel chuckled. "There was an adjustment period. The sitter canceled twice, which meant some schedule juggling. But we managed. Jessica took a day off. I worked from home one afternoon. The world didn't end." The casual way he described these accommodations, so different from the drama that might have ensued months ago, spoke volumes about the shift in their perspective. "The dinner is still on for Saturday," he added as we turned onto my street. "Just family and a few close friends. Nothing elaborate, but Jessica wanted to make it special." "That's very thoughtful," I said, touched by the gesture. My house looked exactly as I'd left it, though Eleanor had placed a vase of fresh flowers on the entry table and a welcome home sign made by the grandchildren hung on the living room wall. Daniel helped carry my luggage inside, then discreetly excused himself. "You probably want to unpack and rest," he said. "We'll see you Saturday, if not before." The thoughtful consideration, giving me space to decompress rather than immediately overwhelming me with family demands, was yet another sign of our evolving relationship. After he left, I moved through my house with new eyes, seeing it as both familiar and somehow changed, or perhaps I was the one who had changed, viewing my surroundings through a different lens. The art studio, in particular, seemed to welcome me with a special warmth, morning light streaming through the windows onto the empty easel that awaited new work. I spent the next few days reacclimating to home while preparing for Saturday's gathering. I selected several paintings from Sedona to display, had the best ones professionally framed at a local shop, and created a small album of photographs and sketches to share the full experience of the workshop. Eleanor came over for coffee the day after my return, eager to hear about every aspect of the trip. As we sat in my sunroom, autumn light filtering through the windows, I found myself speaking about the experience with an eloquence that surprised me. "It wasn't just about painting," I explained, showing her the sketchbook she'd given me, now filled with observations and insights. "It was about seeing, really seeing, both the world around me and myself within it." Eleanor nodded, understanding, in her eyes. "And now that you're back, how does it feel to return to regular life?" The question gave me pause. "Different," I admitted. "Like I'm the same person but occupying a new relationship with my surroundings. Does that make any sense?" "Perfect sense," Eleanor assured me. "You've changed the lens through which you view everything, including yourself. That changes everything else by extension." Saturday arrived with perfect early autumn weather, crisp morning air giving way to golden afternoon warmth, the kind of day that seems designed for gatherings and celebrations. I dressed with particular care, selecting a deep teal blouse that complemented my desert tan and silver jewelry purchased in Sedona. The doorbell rang precisely at 3, When I opened it, I found not just Daniel, Jessica, and the children, but a small crowd of well-wishers: Eleanor, Ruth from the Boundaries group, Martin from the community center, several members of my yoga class, and even Patricia, who had apparently flown in specifically for the occasion. "Surprise!" Lily shouted, bouncing with excitement. "It's a welcome home party!" Jessica stepped forward, a genuine smile warming her face. "We wanted to celebrate your return properly. Hope you don't mind the extra guests." "Not at all," I assured her, touched by the thoughtfulness of including my newly reconstructed community among the family gathering. Daniel and Jessica had transformed my backyard into a lovely reception space, with string lights hung from tree branches, a beautifully arranged buffet on my patio table, and a special display area where my Sedona paintings were artfully arranged, against a neutral backdrop. "This is amazing," I said, taking in the effort they had made. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Daniel replied, squeezing my shoulder gently. "Just enjoy having people who care about you in one place." The afternoon unfolded with a natural rhythm: food and drinks, conversation that flowed easily between family and friends, and eventually a more formal presentation of my work from Sedona. Daniel had even prepared a brief introduction, speaking with genuine admiration about my artistic journey and growth. "Many of you know my mother as Grandma Maggie," he said, addressing the gathered guests. "But before she was my mother or Ethan, and Lily's grandmother, she was an artist. It took us too long to remember that, but we're learning now." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes, tears of recognition, of being truly seen perhaps for the first time in decades. The guests moved among the displayed paintings with evident appreciation, asking questions about techniques and locations, responding to the emotions captured in each piece. Vivian would have been proud, I thought, remembering her emphasis on translating feeling rather than merely copying landscape. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration continued around me, I found myself standing slightly apart, watching the interaction of people from different segments of my life, family and friends, old connections and new ones, all brought together in a moment of genuine community. Patricia approached, a glass of wine in hand and a thoughtful expression on her face. We hadn't had much opportunity to speak earlier beyond brief pleasantries. "Quite the transformation," she commented, gesturing toward the displayed artwork. "In the paintings, I mean. And perhaps elsewhere as well?" I smiled, appreciating her directness. "Yes, on both counts." "Jessica seems different," Patricia observed, watching her daughter across the yard, engaged in animated conversation with Ruth and Eleanor. "Less controlling, perhaps?" "We've all been changing," I acknowledged, "finding a better balance." Patricia nodded, a hint of respect in her expression. "You know, when Jessica first told me you were refusing to babysit during their conference, I thought it was about time, but I didn't expect it to lead to such a significant shift." "Neither did I admitted. "I was just trying to reclaim some small part of myself. I never anticipated how it would transform our entire family dynamic." "Well," Patricia said, raising her glass slightly, "here's to boundaries and the courage to set them." I clinked my glass against hers, appreciating this unexpected moment of solidarity. As the golden afternoon light began to fade into early evening, the children presented me with a handmade book they'd created during my absence. Grandma Maggie's Art Adventure, illustrated with their imaginings of me painting in Sedona. The pages were filled with crayon drawings of red rocks, desert creatures, and a figure with gray hair at an easel, surrounded by speech bubbles containing phrases like, "This is my best painting ever," and "I love being an artist." "This is absolutely wonderful," I told them, kneeling to examine each page with the seriousness it deserved. "You've captured it perfectly." Ethan beamed. "Dad showed us pictures of Sedona on the computer so we could get the rocks right." "And I added the cactuses," Lily announced proudly, pointing to green spiky forms dotting the landscapes. "Did you see real ones?" "I did," I confirmed. "And your drawings are excellent. In fact—" I reached for the small wrapped packages I'd set aside earlier. "I brought you each something special." Their excitement over the paintings was everything I could have hoped for. Ethan examined his with analytical attention, asking questions about how I'd achieved certain effects, while Lily hugged hers to her chest, declaring it the most beautiful picture ever, and immediately planning where it would hang in her room. Jessica watched this interaction with a soft expression I hadn't often seen on her face. When the children ran off to show their treasures to other guests, she approached me. "Those paintings mean the world to them," she said. "They'll cherish them forever." "I hope so," I replied. "I painted them with so much love." A strange expression flickered across her face, something like realization mixed with regret. "That's what you've always given them, isn't it? Love, expressed in different ways. We just didn't always recognize it as such." The insight surprised me, coming from Jessica, who had always seemed more practical than philosophical. "Yes," I agreed simply. "Different expressions of the same love." She nodded, seeming to process this idea. "When you first started setting boundaries, I took it personally, as if you were withdrawing love along with availability. But that wasn't it at all, was it?" "Not at all," I confirmed. "If anything, having healthier boundaries has allowed me to be more genuinely present when I am with all of you." "I can see that now," she said. "The kids feel it too. They talk about special time with Grandma in a different way, not just as something frequent, but as something meaningful." As the evening progressed and guests gradually departed, I found myself sitting on the patio with Daniel, watching the last hint of sunset fade from the sky. The children were inside with Jessica, helping to gather leftover food and supplies. "You've created quite a life for yourself these past few months," Daniel observed, gesturing toward the departed guests. "All these people who value and appreciate." "They were always there," I reflected. "I just didn't have the time or energy to nurture those connections when I was always on call for childcare." Daniel winced slightly at the phrasing but nodded in acknowledgement. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad recently," he said, changing the subject. "About how he always encouraged your painting, even when it meant he had to manage more household responsibilities." The memory brought a smile to my face. James had indeed been supportive in ways unusual for men of his generation, watching Daniel so I could attend evening art classes, taking over Sunday breakfasts so I could paint in the morning light, proudly displaying my work throughout our home. "He understood that loving someone means supporting their wholeness," I said, "not just the parts that directly serve you." Daniel was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "I wish I'd paid more attention to that lesson earlier," he finally said. "It took your rebellion for me to see what was happening." I laughed softly at his choice of words. "Rebellion? Is that what it was?" "From our perspective, absolutely." His smile was rueful. "You'd always been so accommodating, so willing to rearrange your life around our needs. When you suddenly said no, it felt like the natural order had been disrupted." "Perhaps it needed disruption," I suggested. "Sometimes systems only change when they're forced to." "Well, consider us thoroughly disrupted and rearranged," Daniel said with a chuckle, "but in the best possible way." Inside, we could hear Lily's delighted laughter as Jessica apparently tickled her while collecting napkins from the table. The sound drifted through the open windows, joyful, unencumbered, a reminder of what truly mattered in our family ecosystem. "You know," Daniel said, his voice growing more serious, "when you first started setting these boundaries, I was worried about what it meant for the kids, that they'd somehow lose their connection with you or feel less important in your life." "I know," I acknowledged. "That was my fear too." "But it's been the opposite," he continued. Their relationship with you has deepened. They see you more clearly now, not just as grandma, but as Maggie Wilson, artist and individual. That's a gift you've given them, showing them that getting older doesn't mean disappearing into your family roles. His insight moved me deeply. I hadn't considered this aspect, that by reclaiming my identity, I was modeling something valuable for my grandchildren about aging with purpose and self-respect. That means a great deal to me, I said softly. Thank you for seeing it that way. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm, one that balanced family connection with personal fulfillment in ways I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. The paintings from Sedona took pride of place in my home and inspired new work exploring local landscapes with the techniques and insights I'd gained. Daniel and Jessica maintained their commitment to more structured childcare arrangements, relying on after-school programs and regular babysitters for most of their needs. When they did ask for my help, it came in the form of genuine requests rather than expectations, always with proper notice and an understanding that I might decline. More, surprisingly, they began including me in their lives in new ways that had nothing to do with childcare. Jessica invited me to attend a gallery opening featuring artists she'd discovered through her real estate connections. Daniel asked for my input on a creative marketing campaign his firm was developing. These gestures recognized aspects of me, beyond my grandmother role, my artistic eye, my professional experience, my perspective as a woman who had lived through decades of cultural change. The children and I established our own special traditions. Every other Saturday became art morning with Grandma, when they would come to my studio for lessons and creative exploration. Lily showed a natural talent for color and expressive brushwork, while Ethan gravitated toward precise architectural sketches and landscapes with mathematical perspective. Their developing skills and enthusiasm reminded me of my own childhood discoveries in art, creating a beautiful thread of continuity across generations. When autumn gave way to winter, Ruth invited me to lead a special session at the Golden Years Center focused on creative expression as a form of self-reclamation. Standing before the group, many of whom had supported me through my boundary-setting journey, I felt a sense of coming full circle. Art and boundaries might seem unrelated, I told them, displaying some of my before and after work for comparison. But both require the same essential skills, the ability to see clearly, to make deliberate choices about what to include and exclude, and to honor your own vision even when others don't initially understand it. The session sparked considerable discussion, with many participants sharing their own experiences of reclaiming creative pursuits or other aspects of identity that had been submerged beneath family obligations. The most beautiful part, Martha commented near the end, is that by honoring ourselves more fully, we often find we have more genuine love to give, not less. Her observation perfectly captured my experience. By stepping back from constant availability and cultivating my own interests and community, I had actually deepened my capacity for meaningful connection with my family. The grandmother who painted with Ethan and Lily on Saturday mornings, fully present and sharing her authentic passion, gave them something far more valuable than the perpetually available babysitter who had put her own interests aside. When the Christmas holidays approached, bringing their usual potential for family tension and expectation, I found myself far less anxious than in previous years. The clearer boundaries had created space for more thoughtful planning and communication. "We'd love to have you for Christmas Eve dinner," Jessica said during a phone call in early December. "Around 5. That would give you Christmas morning to yourself, which I remember you mentioning you enjoyed." This consideration for my preferences, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago, touched me deeply. "That sounds perfect," I agreed. "I'll bring my cranberry orange bread that Daniel loves. And would you be open to doing a special art project with the kids that afternoon before dinner?" she asked. "They want to make gifts for their teachers, and they insisted only Grandma could help them do it properly." I smiled at the request. Specific? Time limited? and centered on something I genuinely enjoyed sharing with the children. I'd be delighted to. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke early to the soft hush of unexpected snowfall, the first white Christmas our area had experienced in nearly a decade. Standing at my studio window, watching large flakes drift past the glass and settle on the oak tree branches, I felt a profound sense of contentment. The year had brought challenges and changes I couldn't have anticipated, requiring courage I wasn't always sure I possessed. There had been difficult conversations, uncomfortable moments, and periods of doubt. But standing in my art studio, surrounded by my work and looking forward to a day balanced between solitude and family connection, I knew with certainty that every difficult step had been worthwhile. I picked up a brush and a small canvas, inspired to capture the snow-draped oak tree before heading to Daniel and Jessica's later that day. As I mixed colors and made the first tentative strokes, I thought about everything the past year had taught me, about boundaries and balance, about healthy love and authentic connection, about the courage to reclaim oneself after years of self-erasure. The painting took shape beneath my brush, the sturdy trunk of the oak tree standing firm against the winter sky, its branches both bearing the weight of snow and reaching upward toward light. It seemed an apt metaphor for my own journey, rooted in family connection while still growing toward personal fulfillment, flexible enough to bear life's burdens without being defined solely by them. When the painting was finished, I stepped back to evaluate it. It captured exactly what I'd hoped: resilience, beauty, and the quiet dignity of something that had weathered many seasons yet continued to grow and thrive. I decided to bring it with me that evening, a gift for Daniel and Jessica, a symbol of everything we had learned together about the strength that comes from honoring both roots and branches, both connection and separation, both giving and receiving. As I carefully wrapped the small canvas, I thought about the title that had come to mind while painting: Growing Season. Because that was what this year had been, despite its challenges and uncomfortable transformations, a season of genuine growth for all of us. Later, as I drove through the snow-dusted streets toward my son's home, Christmas gifts and art supplies carefully packed beside me, I felt a deep gratitude for the difficult no that had started this journey. By standing up for myself in that pivotal moment, I had ultimately given my family something far more valuable than unlimited childcare. I had given them the gift of knowing me fully, of establishing healthier patterns that would serve us all well into the future, and of modeling the courage to honor one's own needs even when facing resistance. The house came into view, warm lights glowing in the windows against the early winter dusk. I could see Ethan and Lily's faces pressed against the front window, watching for my arrival with visible excitement. As I parked and gathered my things, they burst through the front door, hurrying down the snowy path to meet me. "Grandma, it's snowing on Christmas!" Lily exclaimed, her face alight with wonder. "And we've been waiting all day for art time," Ethan added, reaching for my bag of supplies. Daniel appeared in the doorway, a warm smile on his face as he watched his children welcome me. Beyond him, I could see Jessica arranging something on the dining room table, her movements relaxed and unhurried. This was family, not perfect, still learning, occasionally stumbling, but growing together in ways that honored each individual while strengthening our collective bonds. This was what standing up for myself had ultimately created. Not distance, but a more authentic closeness. Not less love, but love expressed with greater intention and respect. "Merry Christmas," I said, embracing my grandchildren and moving toward the warmth of the home where my son waited. "I've been looking forward to this all day." And I had been, not with the sense of obligation or resignation that might have colored such gatherings in the past, but with genuine anticipation and joy. Because now I came to them as my whole self. Maggie the grandmother, yes, but also Maggie, the artist, Maggie the individual, Maggie the woman who had found the courage to reclaim her right to a balanced life. That, perhaps, was the greatest gift of all, the freedom to love from a place of wholeness rather than depletion, to give from choice rather than obligation, to be not just needed, but truly seen. It had begun with a simple, difficult no, but had blossomed into something far more profound, a resounding, joyful yes to life on more authentic terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.